Hello, hi. Are we all ready to learn about organizational design for enterprise AI? So I wanted to open by doing a survey of the group. I kind of wanted to know what organizational problems already exist in your organization. So can you raise your hand if you've experienced the issue of data silos? Having issues with data silos when you're doing your AI initiatives. Okay. How about data hoarders? These are people who refuse to give you your data even though you're in the same organization and you have the same mission. Experienced it? All right. How about hippos? So hippos, I'm not referring to the animal, I'm referring to the highest paid person's position. So when I say hippo, I'm talking about usually a senior executive who is an old guard in the industry or the company, and this senior executive thinks that data and analysis is overrated and prefers to make decisions using his gut and his vision. Have you encountered hippos in your career? No. All right, so as you've seen, organizational design can be an important part of your enterprise AI strategy. And we've discovered that it is maybe one of the most, if not the most important part. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Mariya Yao. I am the Chief Technology Officer of Metamaven. We build AI solutions focused on revenue growth. I'm also the founder of an education company called TopBots. We provide executive education specifically to teach business leaders how to apply enterprise AI. We've been fortunate to work with some of the world's leading companies when it comes to AI initiatives, as well as a lot of companies who aren't necessarily data or digitally native. And what I've observed is the biggest barrier to AI adoption in the enterprise is usually organizational and not technical. Can you let me know if you might agree with that statement, if you think the problems are usually organizational, not technical? All right. So when you think about what goes into an AI initiative or an AI project at a company, you start with an AI strategy or roadmap. That's where you map business problems to technology solutions. You figure out if you're going to build in-house, how you're going to do your implementation and your maintenance. If you're going to buy, you have to do vendor evaluations and discover partnerships. There's also education and communication, both internal and external. And then there's a lot of people, process, and cultural design change that supports your AI transformation. So when you go looking for advice, you can find advice for the top 3 very easily. And there have been a ton of wonderful sessions at this conference that teach you about the top 3. What typically gets underinvested in, though, are the bottom 2, which is education, communications, as well as org design. Why would it be important to spend more time on education and communications? So if you're in the marketing space, you might have seen this picture, which is the landscape of marketing technologies, of which there are over 7,000 companies. Back in 2011, there were 150. Now it's grown significantly more. And you can imagine that a lot of these vendors are promising that they use AI to drive their features and their solutions. And how can you really tell what's going on? Marketing is not the only culprit. We track hundreds of vendors across enterprise functions, and pretty much all of them do the same. So I am not going to call out names specifically, but just for fun, I took marketing copy from the website of 3 AI companies just to compare. So here's one. We built the world's most powerful distributed AI platform to create solutions that transform the world's most important industries. Do you have any idea what that company does? We combine enterprise-class intelligence with industry-specific customizations that are ready to move into production and deliver value immediately. Do you know what that company does? We're writing the next great chapter in technology. It's an exciting narrative with passionate people make smarter digital software to make a better world. What I think is funny about this is they had to specify their software is digital, so at least you know they are not using punch cards. Now, the challenge with doing this kind of sensational marketing, as we've seen with IBM Watson, they did a lot of advertising, a lot of marketing, some of which may have overstated the actual abilities of their technology systems, and they experienced both customer backlash as well as public and PR backlash. We surveyed hundreds of vendors, and we asked them, what is your biggest problem when it comes to selling your AI solution? By far, nearly every single one of them said that education, internal and external, was their biggest pain point. So I hope that if you didn't believe this already, that perhaps it's worth investing more into your education and communication to support your AI initiatives. Another issue is organizational design. So Accenture came out with a survey recently where they looked at thousands of executives and their AI strategies. 97% of them said that they were already or planning to use AI to enhance worker capabilities. Only 3% said that their organizations planned to increase training spending significantly over the next 3 years. This report concluded this low level of commitment will radically curtail their ability to deploy AI at scale. Because if you don't train your workforce on how to leverage these new automation technologies, how are they going to be successful? So you may be asking, well, aren't companies spending a lot of money on technical training and acquiring technical talent? Well, absolutely. But any of you who've deployed a production machine learning model knows that the actual machine learning code is a minuscule proportion of the actual technology infrastructure required to productize your research. Similarly, in an organization, especially one that is not digital native or not data native, your tech organization is a minuscule part of your entire organization. And this is even true if you're at a company like Amazon, which is one of the largest employers in the United States, employing 500,000 employees. The median salary, $28,000, which pales in comparison to Jeff Bezos' $164.7 billion net worth. So you have to remember that even if you work at a technology company, that doesn't mean everyone at that company works in technology. They may never work in technology. How are you going to take care of your workforce and retrain them and reskill them in the age of automation? So I hope I've convinced you this is important to master. But what's really important is you see a lot of education on how to build a successful data science team, how to get the most out of your ML engineers. If you're running a data science or ML team, you're probably already good at that. But what you might not be good at is actually dealing with the rest of your organization. If you are good at dealing with the rest of your organization, especially non-technical business leaders and the future workforce that will be using your technologies, it can accelerate your AI progress. Specifically, you can have an easier time getting business stakeholder buy-in and budget. If you have an AI service or product, you'll have a more successful time selling that. And ultimately, you'll be able to build a more sustainable long-term solution. So that's what we're going to be covering today in my talk, Organizational Design for Effective AI. It's split into 2 sections. One is how can you prepare business leaders for AI adoption? The second is how do you prepare organizations for human-machine collaboration? So the first thing I want to talk about is misconceptions. So generally, if you want to drive an AI initiative at a company, you need C-suite buy-in. Very specifically, Siobhan Zillis, who is a well-known investor in AI, she said, generally speaking, you're more likely to be successful if your C-suite executives have a technical or math degree, and they understand that AI is not magic, it is just difficult math. That's a quite fortunate scenario if you find yourself in one. We have found that a lot of companies do not have a C-suite that has this kind of advanced degree and a natural understanding of AI. What we found instead is there are a lot of misconceptions that we actually have to fight when we first enter an organization. One of which is we have achieved AGI. And this misconception comes often from things like IBM Watson's ads, where if you've seen any of their ads, they basically hire celebrities to talk to a box that pretty much seems like it's a sentient human being. So they'll get Bob Dylan and Serena Williams to just have a natural conversation with IBM Watson. If you've ever built conversational AI, you know how difficult that actually is. Another misconception is that AI, chatbots, and robots are all the same thing. This is an interchangeable term. This is a very frequent thing. You can blame Justin Timberlake for that. So have any of you seen Justin Timberlake's Filthy music video? Really? Oh, you need to watch it. So he literally dresses up as Steve Jobs, and he sets the music video at a Pan-Asian deep learning conference. I kid you not, this is a screenshot from Justin Timberlake's music video. And at this conference, he launches a dancing robot. So if someone starts to associate deep learning with robot, it's not necessarily because they're idiots, it's because they've seen a lot of content. And in fact, this music video has been seen 65 million times, which I think is more than all O'Reilly conference sessions in total. I would be willing to bet. So how do we battle these kinds of misconceptions? We do a lot of executive education. And by far, our most popular workshop is one called WTF is AI. And in this workshop, we keep it really, really basic. And we spend a rather laughable amount of time telling people that AI does not equal chatbots. We explain to people there's a landscape of automation of which AI is just a very small subset. And the vast majority of chatbots you experience are they're not AI, right? They're automation, but not AI. So then naturally the question is, where does automation end and where does AI begin? To help non-technical people understand this, we created the TopBots Machine Intelligence Continuum, which creates 7 levels of machine intelligence. We have to explain to people that the level 1, systems that act, is rule-based automation. For example, your cruise control. If you set a threshold on your cruise control for speed, if your car starts to dip below it, it will automatically apply the accelerator to keep you above that speed. You would not set your cruise control, take your hands off the wheel, and pretend you have a self-driving car. A self-driving car is at level 3, systems that learn. What does it actually mean for a machine to learn? Let's look at the learning process. In the learning process, you take data and you create a prediction. You combine this prediction with judgment to take action. Action produces an outcome, you look at the feedback, and then you improve your prediction. A machine learning system automates some piece of this learning process. So a lot of machine learning systems like decision support will automate the data to prediction level. But a self-driving car actually takes care of this entire process. So when we're explaining different levels of machine intelligence in our WTF is AI class, we don't say the terms big data, we don't say data science, we don't say deep learning, we don't go into what algorithm is different than that and what kind of models do what, because it is a lot of work already to just undo the damage that a lot of executives will have about what is AI and what is it capable of doing. Artificial general intelligence, so basically human level or more intelligence, or general intelligence. So another misconception, we should use AI for everything. Yeah, so I was at CES earlier this year, and I was pitched a number of products that probably don't need AI. For example, I was pitched an AI-powered pet food container with an AI-powered nutritional algorithm that analyzes your kitty food and tells you what to change. I also saw an AI toy for cats. So this is a robotic mouse powered by computer vision, which will automatically play with your cat. If you're wondering, why does my cat get all the AI toys? There are also AI toys for humans. There was an AI-powered standing desk, and their PR representative told me that this standing desk not only automatically remembers your settings, it also automatically orders your lunch. And AI can even tell you when to go to the bathroom. So when an entrepreneur tells you that he is going to use AI to disrupt the adult diaper market, you know that we have hit peak hype. How does this affect your business strategy? So we had a customer who came to us and said, we need an omni-channel chatbot for our customer service. People, they're not able to use our self-service FAQ. We need to make sure we hit them on all these channels and give them a conversational experience. We analyzed their issues, and we also analyzed their existing FAQ. We noticed that about 80% of their issues came from one topic, and that topic did not get the top visual hierarchy in their FAQ. By solving this problem, we were able to use UX design to solve this problem quicker, faster, and cheaper than if we had tried to implement this multi-channel, fancy, sentient chatbot that they actually wanted. So you have to remember that you're not in the business of selling AI, you're in the business of solving problems. So a lot of times AI is really not the solution, and what you want to be presenting is something that will actually deliver value. So another big misconception is that building AI is the same thing as building software. As you know, software has a sort of standard software development lifecycle where you start with the requirements, gathering the technical specs, you go to UI, UX design, you go into development, you do testing, you do deployment, and you do maintenance, right? And then you repeat this process. And even if you're doing an agile process, all you're doing is moving through this process faster, right? It's the same cycle, just a little bit more modular. Machine learning is different. So in a machine learning workflow, you first need to start with defining your problem and your goal. This is probably the most important part and often the least invested in. So you first define your problem and your goal, which then tells you how you are supposed to collect your data. You prepare your data, you find models that work with your data, you deploy your model, you track your model in production to make sure it's not decaying, and then you repeat this process. Again, it is a fundamentally different process because if you're waiting for the machine to learn patterns from data, you don't necessarily know what that's going to be in advance. So rather than doing these kind of monolithic plans, you are forced to be a lot more iterative and a lot more agile in the AI product development process. So something that helps executives is this thing called the AI Idea Maze. This was created by Chris Dixon. I know it's too small to read, so I'll outline it for you. The first step is to achieve an MVP of about 80 to 90% accuracy. So this obviously varies widely depending on the task you are trying to automate, but generally speaking, if you're talking about a commodity problem, you can get to some kind of machine learning model that is 80 to 90% accurate within about a few weeks to a few months. Then you need to decide how important are those last 10 to 20% accuracy points. Because in some scenarios like self-driving cars, they're critically important. In a lot of business scenarios, they are actually not. So if it's not that important, you can figure out a way to embed your model into a fault-tolerant user experience, meaning when the model fails, how can you mitigate the negative impact on your user or on your business? Now, if you have to go for that last 10 to 20%, understand that it literally may take you to the rest of infinity to get these last accuracy points. So you need to do one of two things. You either need to narrow your domain, and if you've already narrowed your domain, narrow it again, or you need to gather more data. And then I added my own step, which is that if data is too expensive, go work for Google. Because another thing to be honest about is that there is a lot of data that you may need for specific use cases that you will not be able to acquire. And being really upfront about that will help you make more strategic decisions around where you should invest your time versus what might be a waste of time. So another misconception is we're ready for AI now. So I'm not going to spend too much on that in this particular presentation, but I did write an article that says, if you suck at data and analytics, you're not ready for AI. And it talks about how important data literacy is, how important it is you get some of these organizational issues fixed before you say, oh, we're using AI. So again, the thing to remember is a lot of people think that if you want to sell your AI solution, you should brag about how your model is state-of-the-art and how you won best paper at NIPS. What we've observed is that people don't care. Like very, very small percentage of executives will actually read your research paper, figure out how you built your model. Most of the time, especially if you're working at a company that is not data native, not digital native, you will be dealing with executives who do not have an advanced degree. And so you have to communicate with them in a way that meets them at their level, rather than assuming that they're going to care about the intricacies of different algorithms right off the bat. So those are the misconceptions that we find it's very important to be mindful of and to include in your executive communication when you're either selling an internal stakeholder who is not technical or you're trying to sell an AI solution to another company that is not as technically savvy as yours. Another thing to understand is that data is ultimately the fuel of all machine learning algorithms. And therefore, it's very important to educate executives that data alone is not ground truth. This is an excellent article by Angela Bassa. I recommend you read it. Data is a human construction. People make data, people process data, and people interpret data. Therefore, data is very, very privy to many errors. So we spend a lot of time educating executives around what are the common issues with data and how can you fix that. So one common issue is undefined goals. As we saw in the machine learning workflow, defining your problem and defining your goals is the most important and the first step of a successful machine learning project. Unfortunately, a lot of people are not very clear about what they're actually trying to achieve. And related to this is definition error. You might think something like, okay, well, I want to know how many sales did we make from our customers last quarter? Sounds like a simple question. Well, how are you defining customer? If a customer bought this quarter and then refunded next quarter, how are you calculating that? And then what do you mean by quarter? Are you talking about fiscal quarters or calendar quarters? Because that differs around the world. And then even if you're talking about fiscal quarters, different companies have wacky systems with regard to how they do their financial reporting, which you need to adjust for. So a question as simple as, how many sales did I get from my customers last quarter is actually not trivial. And that's where you get a lot of definition errors. Another common error is coverage error. So an obvious example of this is, let's say you wanted to do some analysis on how mobile users behave around a scenario. But in order to test this, you only launch an iOS app. Well, that's poor coverage because you're completely missing Android users, and they behave fundamentally different from iOS users in certain circumstances. A more subtle one would be, let's say you were interested in knowing what age groups are most interested in your product or service. If you test this by putting a website survey up, you should not be surprised if you don't get that many responses from senior citizens, because they are not used to filling out surveys on computers. Another error is inference error. So as data scientists and machine learning engineers, you're all very well versed. This is the error that the machine learning model makes. So when it's not accurate, you know that there's a difference between a true positive, false negative, that sort of thing. What we have found is that executives that we work with almost never know the difference between accuracy, precision, and recall. So if they got a decision support model that told them, oh, I have a prediction, it's 95% confidence, or my model is 95% accurate, they may think, oh, that's wonderful, that's a big number, that sounds good. Wait a second, not necessarily true. So taking the time to actually educate your executives on what seems to you like basic statistics, almost laughably basic, is critically important if you want them to interpret the output of your machine learning efforts correctly. So there's a lot of other errors. I don't have time to cover all of them in this presentation, but if you want to read more about them, there's an article that I wrote called "Avoid These Common Mistakes Business Executives Make with Data," which goes over all 9 of these examples. Why is it important to educate executives and empower them about their own data? Many of you raised your hands when you said, I have data hoarders. I'm dealing with people who don't want to give me their data. Data hoarders often have 2 very legitimate fears. Often there is internal competition within an organization. If there's internal competition and data is the fuel for machine learning, then of course I'm going to hoard my data and not give it to you. A second fear is, if you look at my data, maybe you'll find out I'm not performing, because historically my performance evaluation has been a little bit more qualitative. Those are 2 very legitimate fears, right? So what we found is a potentially effective way to deal with data hoarders is to first give as much value as you can. So if you go to a data hoarder and you say, hey, did you know these are some common mistakes with data? Oh, hey, there's a way to get more value out of your data. And you empower this executive to make the best possible decision with their own data. They begin to view you as someone who really knows how to extract business value from data. And then when you later on go to ask them to collate their data with others in the company, they actually might be more amenable to your suggestion if you had initially demonstrated and delivered a lot of value for them. And so we do that, for example, by making sure that executives are educated about how to use data and how they can avoid making a lot of these very obvious data mistakes, which incidentally, I've seen data scientists make the same mistakes. So it's not just an executive problem. So next, I want to talk about Sales 101. So I've observed that a lot of times technology leaders, they're bad at sales, to put it nicely. And if you are trying to drive major AI initiatives at either your company or you're trying to make a complex sale, you need to get good at sales. So the fundamental rule of software sales is people don't buy software, they buy benefits. So a lot of times people will try to sell the features of a product. The point is, what do I get if I use your product? What is the value that I get? Now you may be saying, well, Maria, I know this already, it's basic. I sell the benefits of my software and I'm still not getting sales. Well, another fundamental law of sales is that people buy emotionally and then they justify rationally. So what you'll hear from someone is, like, let's say you survey a customer, why did you buy us instead of a competitor? They'll say, well, I thought you had these features. And they'll give you a logical explanation, but the actual purchasing decision was likely emotional. So I'll dig into this a little bit more. Every prospect or stakeholder that you are trying to sell has some kind of current state. And ideally, they have some kind of agitation or frustration in their current state. Because if someone is completely content in their current state, you're not going to sell them an AI solution. So ideally, they have some agitation like, my CEO, he told me my responsibility is to come up with an AI strategy. What does that even mean? That could be an example of an agitated current state. And everyone who has an agitated current state has a more desirable future state they would like to be in. For example, I want to be the AI hero of my company. I'm going to double our revenue and be promoted to CEO. And this sounds like a facetious example, like it's dramatized, but actually we work with a lot of executives who are in contention to be the CEO, or who are in contention to become included in the C-suite, and AI initiatives are a major factor in their decision-making. So being really honest and open about what someone actually desires is very important. Another thing is to identify what is blocking them, because if they could achieve their desired state by themselves, they would have done it already. Why are they not able to do it? They're either unable to do it, or they want to do it faster, or they're scared and want someone with a lot of experience to help them. That's one of the reasons. Those are 3 of the major reasons why someone goes seeking some kind of solution. So when you're selling an AI solution, you're not selling the technology, you're not selling the features, you are selling the transformation from the current state to the desired state. And when you're selling a senior executive, all senior executives got to their positions by thinking at multiple levels of abstraction. So the senior executive is not just out to transform himself or herself. They're also thinking about what's the desired transformation for my team? What's the desired transformation for my company? What is the desired transformation for society? And so this is what you need to think of when you are selling AI solutions. But a challenge is that sometimes people are unclear about their current state and they're unclear about their desired state. And what you'll find is that sometimes transformations need to be more incremental. And this is particularly true if you're doing a complex sale or you're doing an internal sale where you're selling the same stakeholder over and over again. So an example might be your hippos. So a lot of you raised your hands and you said you're dealing with hippos. A common fear of hippos is that data may make them obsolete. And to be fair, a lot of hippos built $1,000,000 and billion-dollar businesses using their gut, using their intuition, and using their vision, right? So another way to potentially connect with a hippo is to say, we would love to clone you if we could, right? Like, we wish we could get more of you, but we can't. So could you help us make a decision support tool so that other executives can learn how to make decisions as well as you can? So it becomes more about how do we immortalize this person's decision-making rather than how do we make this person obsolete. And so in that way, you're kind of transforming them from someone who's fearful to someone who might be excited about your project. So again, when you're diagnosing why some kind of initiative, you're not able to push this initiative through, remember that you're selling transformation. So there's only really 4 problems that could be wrong. One is you misunderstood the current state. Again, if someone is complacent and content where they are, they're not going to make a change. So maybe you think somebody wants something, but they don't. Another more common one is to misunderstand the desired state. So for example, executives pretty much all have to say that they want to be the innovators in their industry. They all say that, right? But a lot of times what the real desire is, well, we want to be perceived as innovative, but we want to get that with as little risk and as little effort as possible. That's the actual desire. So you need to be honest, like what is the real desire? What is the transformation? You might sell them something that is a quick hit or something that's good for optics rather than something that's more structurally sound for the business if you actually want to close that sale. Another big problem is your solution does not drive transformation. So assuming you've correctly mapped the current state and assuming you've correctly mapped the desired state, which frankly a lot of people don't do, then your solution needs to actually drive transformation. A lot of times when people sell you, they're selling you something that you don't think will actually help you achieve your desired state. So be very honest with yourself about this rather fundamental problem. And then the last one is you fail to communicate why they need your solution right now to drive their transformation. So that's a communication failure on your side, assuming that the top 3 conditions have been met. So Sales 101, obviously sales gets a lot more complex than that. But based on observation, I've seen a lot of AI initiatives get shot down simply by ignoring the basic fundamental laws of sales. So in this next section, I'm going to talk about preparing organizations for human-machine collaboration. And I want to talk about trends in organizational design. So in general, we've seen a macro trend where organizations are moving from stable, flat hierarchies to these more dynamic, flexible, and modular networks. One example of this is the increased use of contract, freelance, and crowdsourced talent. And you see this particularly in machine learning with when you need data and you need human experts to label it, you see the heavy use of crowdsourcing in the AI process from providers like Figure 8, Mechanical Turk, and Mighty AI. Similarly, in the software world, we've seen a transition from these kind of monolithic software architectures to service-oriented architectures. And then more modern is these agile microservices, which makes it very, very easy, fast, and flexible to develop software. This same trend you can see in the global workforce economy, where you're seeing the rise of freelancers, contractors, small businesses, agencies, small vendors that are almost like microservices in a way, where instead of having all of these people in-house in some monolithic corporation, you can now get their services on demand as you need them. Tom Chi, who's the founder of Google X, he said, corporations are nothing more than ways of organizing work. And the only point in organizing work is to empower individuals and benefit society. So if you can imagine the future, right now, corporations and companies are limited in terms of how big and complex they can get because they're managed by human intelligence. But in the future, instead of working for a company, maybe you work for a mission or you work for an initiative. And under this initiative, there's a bunch of different companies and a bunch of different people and a bunch of different organizations. So you can kind of see that might be the potential future if we get the automation of work right. What's happening more realistically and more today is that enterprises employ more of a hybrid model. So in this hybrid model, your core services, so your core revenue-driving businesses, keep this stable, flat hierarchy, but then you develop these agile teams, because what you want to do is you want to separate your core business from your R&D infrastructure, ideally, in order to make sure that you are not only building the business of today, you're also building the business of tomorrow. And so you can see a lot of times these agile teams can be machine learning teams that are extremely effective. So there are a lot of other questions that people will normally ask. So they might ask, okay, well, do I need a CAO, like a chief AI, CAIO, a chief AI officer? Well, that really depends on how much AI is imbued in your products. If you run a quantitative hedge fund, maybe you do need a CAI officer. Another question is, do I centralize or decentralize my team and my infrastructure? What we have seen is, generally speaking, people do a mix. So you'll have some kind of center of excellence, which is both the central data science team and the central machine learning infrastructure, similar to Facebook's FB Learner, Twitter's Cortex, Uber's Michelangelo. And then you'll have the product teams build on top of that central infrastructure and work with a centralized data team on standards. So, as we mentioned earlier, one big concern is that executives are buying AI and they're ready to invest in AI, but they are not actually investing in training programs. And so one of the biggest issues is it's pretty obvious how you might train technical talent, right? Like, it's pretty easy to get some machine learning courses, blockchain courses, quantum computing courses. It's kind of obvious how you train technical talent. The biggest reason why executives have not prepared education for the rest of the organization is that they literally say, I actually can't tell what's going to happen. Like, I can't predict how my workplace needs and skills needs are going to change with automation coming in. But it's critically important to actually get this answer right. So here are some ways that people have done it. One is to use the sort of traditional education systems like universities and colleges. So BMW has a scholars program very specifically focused on factory workers. These are people most likely to be disrupted by automation in the next couple years. They are allowed to go get an accredited degree and get training for 2 years while they're on the job that is specifically designed to get them into a different job at BMW at the end of that program. E-learning is also a growing trend, and millions of people have used MOOCs, massively online courses. And the nice trend here is that you're seeing increasingly more companies say that they don't care if you have a college degree. A college degree is no longer relevant. What's relevant is your skills, right? And so You're seeing things like Udacity will provide nano degrees, where they partner with industry partners like Google to train you in a particular skill. So their machine learning engineer nano degree is partnership with AWS and Kaggle. Their self-driving car engineer nano degree is with Mercedes-Benz and NVIDIA. Another way to think about talent is, well, is there a way for you to capitalize on the education that's already out there? Because creating training materials from scratch is really, really difficult. As we saw earlier with even just educating executives about AI, sometimes you need to be very creative. So another approach is creating platforms that let subject matter experts curate the knowledge that is necessary based on material that already exists out there. So Accenture has something called the Future Talent Platform. That's basically like the Pinterest of learning, which allows corporations to allow their own employees to crowdsource training information. Another approach to training kind of requires that you have the ability to build really compelling design experiences. So like several years ago, it was really popular for corporations to buy up design agencies. So Facebook bought Hot Studios, Capital One bought Adaptive Path, Accenture bought Fjord and Matter. These kinds of agencies know how to build really, really compelling digital experiences. So Accenture had an issue where they had a code of business ethics document, and of course, nobody was reading it, because who reads ethics documents and actually remembers what they say? It's a lot of legalese. And so what they did was they had their design agency, Fjord, which they acquired, make a chatbot that actually made it easier to learn about business ethics at the company and to make their business ethics document a lot more people-friendly. So, like for example, if you wanted to know, do we have some kind of AI ethics program? Instead of digging through a lot of legalese, you can just ask this bot, also called COBE, which stands for Code of Business Ethics. You can ask COBE, hey, do we have any kind of ethical principles related to AI? So those are some examples of recent trends in organizational design, as well as some ideas for how you might be able to develop training programs for the non-technical portions of your organization. But now I want to talk about, well, if you're developing skills, what are the skills that you actually need to train for? So we know that the nature of jobs is going to change dramatically. We know that jobs are becoming going from being tactical to being more strategic. They're going from routine to being creative. They're going from predictive to requiring more adaptation and dealing with uncertainty. And they're going from dependent to more independent. Rather than rely on someone else to tell you what to do, you need to think of what you need to do. And then finally, we may be seeing a shift of work where people, instead of working for a company, they're working for an initiative. Because a company, after all, is just a way to organize work. So when people talk about this, they always talk about soft skills like communication and empathy. Because as computers take over more routine tasks, you're dealing with a lot of the more human tasks, so you need to know how to relate to other humans. And I definitely agree that these are very important. But there are a lot of other skills that people rarely talk about that I think are absolutely critical, and I often see them missing even in the skills of the executives that are trying to implement AI programs. So one is humility. The reality is that the world is moving faster and technology is evolving faster than any of us actually know. And so when you think you're an expert because of some past success, it makes you a lot less likely to actually predict the future. And so luckily, I actually found a Udemy class where they teach the power of humility for just $10. But the reality is that humility obviously takes a lifetime to learn and to practice. But this isn't a bad start. Another one is learning how to learn. So one of Coursera's most popular classes is actually titled this. It's called Learning How to Learn, How to Master Tough Subjects. And the main thing to understand here is that we often have this fixed mindset. Like, I'm smart, so I should be able to do X. And then if I can't do X, then I just quit. And that is going to be very, very damaging for this rapidly moving future where we really need people to have a growth mindset. And so learning how to master difficult subjects that you find challenging, that you're kind of scared about. A lot of executives have math anxiety. How do you master that? So another one is probability. As you've probably experienced, people suck at probability. it's very difficult for people to reason about chance. But if you can't reason about chance, you can't deal with uncertainty. Most people have basically three possible categories, right? Either it won't happen, it will happen, or it's a coin flip. It's 50-50. This has a big ramification when you are giving people the output of prediction systems and you're telling them to interpret them. You're very likely going to have people misinterpret or not really understand how to use the output of your machine learning models if you do not also train them on how to think probabilistically, how to reason about uncertainty. So there are a lot more skills that I think are important, including things like grit, systems thinking, creativity. But I'd say probably the most important is ownership, which is, look, we are entering this world where there's a lot more uncertainty, and you need to take your own destiny. You need to learn how to choose your own destiny. So that's it for organizational design for enterprise AI. If you're interested in learning more, I have a book called Applied Artificial Intelligence, a handbook for business leaders. We launched it in June, and it's been the #1 bestseller in AI on Amazon since then. And so I have actually a couple copies with me if you would like to get one. And then if you want the slides, my only ask is that you give me some feedback on how I can make this presentation better for you. So if you fill out my survey, I would be delighted to send you the slides. And if you have any other questions for me, you can email me at maria@topbots.com. Thank you.